A young boy in northwestern Ontario, Canada claims he encountered an entity that he referred to as the Boogeyman. This case can be found on the Bigfoot Encounters website and marks one of the few cases to have occurred in the Terrace Bay area of Ontario, a small town of only around 2,000 people. It was the summer of 1968. Edward Scott, who was only a young man at the time, claims that one evening at around 9 p.m., he went to get a glass of milk in the kitchen. As he closed the fridge, he heard what sounded to him like the trash bins outside tipping over. He immediately opened the back door, and to his right he observed a large mother bear and her two cubs eating some leftover food out of the bins. Edward's mother, hearing the door open, ran into the room and closed it. Edward recalled that the parents in his small community would not allow the children to be out after the sun went down. They had told him that the boogeyman was outside and would get them if they went out after dark, a familiar scared straight tactic used by parents all over the world. Edward assumed that maybe the only boogeyman in Terrace Bay were the hungry bears which occasionally came in from the woods to scavenge. He believed that was probably the real reason for the curfew. However, a few weeks later, he would encounter something that would change his mind. It was early August. Edward was sharing his room at the time with his older brother, whose bed was near the bedroom window of his parents' bungalow. As usual, the brother had been reading and eventually dozed off. Edward called out to him to turn off the table lamp between the window and his bed, but at that point the brother was in a deep sleep. Edward got up out of bed and went to turn off the light. Upon approaching the night table, he saw out the window the silhouette of a tall, somewhat hunchback, long hairy-armed prowler with an ape-like profile moving toward the gate of the backyard. As it was passing by my window, my hand trembled as I reached to open the clear white curtain just a little so I could see the figure's whole face. I moved the curtain and it stopped and turned to face the window. Terrified, I quickly turned off the light, stumbled onto the edge of my brother's bed only to fall to the floor. I ran to my bed, jumped in it, and threw the covers over my head. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Since we never heard of a Sasquatch Bigfoot before, I thought maybe there was some truth to the boogeyman after all. The next morning, Edward heard his parents outside in the yard. The mother was upset that her garden had been completely trampled on, and that part of the backwood wire fence separating the bush and the yard had been plowed over as if a bulldozer had gone right through it. Edward's father commented that it must have been a very large bear, as the tracks in the garden and on the lawn leading to the street were massive. Since we lived close to a steep hill, we called it the drop that led down to our part of Lake Superior. It is most likely whatever it was made its escape down the drop into the woods around the lake. Edward's father and some neighbors ventured down into the forest looking for whatever had destroyed the garden. I told my mother what I had seen the night before. The expression on her face did not match the stern advice she gave. No, her expression was similar to mine, and I could swear she too had seen this figure at a time in her past. I never spoke to her again about what I had seen, yet in my mind and heart, I know it was no animal or human outside my window that late summer night when I was 7 years old. This case appeared in the Fortean Times and involves a strange death that was investigated in the seaside resort town of Brighton in East Sussex. The author of the article identified himself as a police officer and claimed that the incident happened in August 1994. At the time, he and his colleagues were patrolling the Queen's Park area of Brighton when a call came in. Around 2 a.m., we were asked to attend an incident outside the park gates where an ambulance unit was attending a casualty. On arrival at the scene, we found the paramedics attempting to resuscitate an elderly woman who was lying by the roadside, apparently without success. The odd thing was that we were informed that the lady, when found, was covered in green slime, which apparently appeared to have drowned her. The officer claimed that the stuff was everywhere, including all over the casualty as well as the paramedics tending to her. Furthermore, he noted that there was a large amount of the slime in the gutter running some 20 feet down the road. The lady was eventually taken to a nearby hospital where further attempts were made to revive her, which sadly were unsuccessful. When the lab examined the substance, it was found to be algae-like. and apparently had been ingested in sufficient quantities to cause the lady's stomach to literally detonate, causing her death. At this, the case was closed. According to the officer, one theory that had been bandied about was that the victim was a hydromaniac who had been drinking from the pond in the park and had staggered away only for the algae to ferment inside her, expand, and cause the injury. However, the family of the lady denied any history of this type of activity and were obviously distressed at this suggestion. For our part, we noticed that the water level in the lake was low. She would have to have climbed into the muddy shallows and drunk the stagnant water from the edge. There was no evidence of mud on her feet or hands. There were no muddy footprints in evidence, neither did the slime smell stagnant. In fact, it had a soapy smell, not unlike detergent. I found this case to be interesting because I have heard of other abduction accounts in which people who are taken either describe waking up covered in a type of slime or encountering other people who are covered in slime, sometimes inside human-sized canisters or tanks. Well-known abductee Ricky G has spoken at length about his experience of being taken by beings and of the vat filled with slime that he woke up inside. Linda Moulton Howe is reported on mutilated cattle, which are found covered in a strange slime too. Was this woman's death in Brighton somehow connected to a UFO? Was this case one of those rare instances in which an alien abduction ends in tragedy? Given the lack of mud on her clothes and the significant amount of ooze described by the officer, it sounds as though this woman was in some kind of a tank, and she and the contents of said tank were deposited there in the park to be found by paramedics and officers. On the other hand, who knows?